in the movement that I was involved in, they did not like Trump. His daughter was married to a Jewish person. He's a huge supporter of Israel. That's not compatible with neo-Nazism.
Welcome back to If I'm Really Honest, where I seek truth without tribalism. Hopefully it's a place where ignorance isn't punished, curiosity is rewarded, and conflict doesn't mean contempt. As always, I hope I've brought you someone who you don't fully agree with, and if you've brought yourself, you're way ahead of me on that one. Today I'm joined by Jeff Schoep, the former commander of America's largest neo-Nazi organization. He's now a peace advocate, dedicating his life to dismantling the hate he once spread. You're going to hear our discussion about things like Christianity and MAGA, the punch-a-Nazi trend, what it is that creates a racist, and what it takes to make peace with people who hate peace. This actually connects to my upcoming video on psychopaths and pedophiles, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss that one when it drops. All right, you ready? Of course not. Let's dive in. What is the relationship between, and I'm going to throw out a bunch of terms here that I've heard, Nazis, neo-Nazis, KKK, white supremacists, skinheads, white nationalists, alt-right? In my world, these are all synonyms. Are those all the same thing, or is there a relationship? Okay, I figured.
No, they're all different things. You just asked me like 20 questions all in one.
Right, I know. I'm sorry. I'm really that ignorant.
No, there's similarities between some of those groups, but there's also a lot of differences, and there's a lot of nuance in between that. So, and that is, it is a common misunderstanding, I think, with a lot of people. When they look at it from the outside looking in, you just assume it's kind of all the same. But most of these groups actually don't even get along with each other, even though they have similar ideologies and beliefs. There's a lot of infighting and things of that nature that go on in there. I mean, I can break it all down if each group, but you have to ask me one at a time.
Well, so my own personal background is religious, and I know that even within a single denomination, like the different churches in a denomination still don't agree with each other. So I'm assuming that those are all very different things if you live in that world, and that even within those groups, there are the good groups and the bad groups, depending on who you're Are there any overarching characteristics that do unite them despite their multiple divisions? Or like, is there any particular one of those? Like if you said like, Christians and Jews, I'd be like, well, those aren't really the same category. Is there any categories in there that you're like, well, actually, no, these are extremely different things and there's no uniting principles?
Well, as far as you're asking about like the extreme far right groups in particular?
Sure. Maybe I should have started with what labels did you use to identify with, and what were the farthest from the labels that you gave to yourself?
Well, I was involved with the National Socialist Movement, so I was. That's for people that are not aware of it or don't know. That's the Nazi Party, the American Nazi Party. The organization is called National Socialist Movement, so that would be like a neo-Nazi organization. So that would have been different from, like, say, the Ku Klux Klan. Skinheads is kind of all over the place. You have some that are neo-Nazis. You have some that are far left, Antifa type, extreme far left. You have non-political that are just into like the scene and the music and things like that. So they're kind of all over the place. Different other different groups, there's subcategories as well, because there's different religions that some of these groups follow. So some follow like Christian identity. That's one religion. Others will follow, the old gods, the pagan gods, and some have no religion at all, or they're part of something like creativity, which is like an atheist-based made up. I don't know if it's a made up religion, I guess you could say, but like, I don't know what the proper term for that is, but it's another type of religion. And some don't have any faith at all as far as religion goes. Some are just, into it for the politics. So there's really a lot of nuance when it comes to that.
Okay, so then what are like some of the labels you would have given yourself, and what are some of that group's worst enemies? Just to give me some kind of like a grid. Because again, my ignorance level is really high in this field.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess what labels, like, what do they call themselves? A lot of times the group would say like, we don't like the term Nazi because that's like a slur. We're National Socialists, so that was something that you'd constantly correct people on that. But at some point, it was just sort of like, well, that's the word people understand. Or when they hear socialist, they think left, far left. So there was always having to explain that as well.
Right?
No, it's not this. it's something else. And, so another term, I guess, or a label that people would use would be like white separatist or white pride or things like that. Most of them would not say, I could tell you, like when I was involved, I didn't like the term racist. I would say, no, I'm not a racist. I'm a racialist. A lot of the people will. Some embrace that term, but it just depends on the individual or sometimes the group on how they frame those things. So, there's a lot of differences in framing as far as that goes. And as far as like the second part of your question, like enemies or enemy groups, when you're involved in these groups, you're like at war with the world. I mean,
Yeah.
if you really boil it down, you are at war with the world because you're at war with competing organizations. You might come together for a rally or something public here or there, but typically the groups didn't get along very well and would fight. And sometimes there would be violence. Sometimes there wouldn't. It would just be bickering or online stuff. But they didn't get along. But the greatest enemy of a lot of these groups, as far as the neo-Nazi groups, would be the Jewish people. Jews were blamed for everything. And they didn't like the other races, obviously, didn't like homosexuals, lesbians. They didn't like just about anybody. If you weren't part of that in-group and you weren't part of that organization, it's like being in an echo chamber or a bubble. So everyone that's outside of that echo chamber or beyond those barriers outside that bubble is potentially suspect or the enemy. And it's a world of high paranoia as well, because you also have to be on the lookout for informants, whether they're coming from the government, whether they're coming from far left groups, you name it. There's groups that infiltrate into these organizations. So you never know if the guy next to you is your brother, your friend, or he's somebody that's paid to be there or that got caught for something and now they're snitching or things like that. So there's a lot. It's very complex. It's not quite as easy as it might appear from the outside looking in, or as cut and dry, I should say.
Right. Yeah. When you're in it, are you aware of the high levelings of anxiety, or is it just something that runs in the background?
That's tough to say because I mean you're aware of it. You're hyper aware of it. When I first got involved, there was some instances that happened, where people had tried to set people up and things like that. So I learned very quickly that not everybody that was around was of good intentions. So there was things like that, lessons that I learned real early on. That heightened my paranoia level, or as far as being on the lookout for things, and later on, I mean, there was all kinds of stuff going on where we even at different times we're using lie detector tests on people to try to ferret out some of these people. We were having people record phone conversations in different cases, or things like that. There was a lot of subterfuge and stuff going on. So I was hyper aware of it. Not everybody was, but when you're in a leadership position, if you're not, it can cost you your life, your freedom. So I was hyper aware of it. So I can't speak for everybody, but I know it was something that I was always very, very aware of.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got so many questions. I need to take a step back, though. One of my most ignorant questions, perhaps, is what is the link between Black people and Jews? It seems like again, this umbrella that holds a lot of people that don't get along in my brain. They tend to dislike Black people and Jews, and I don't understand. And everybody. I mean, like you're saying, you're at war with the world, but in particular, these two keep coming up. Is there a relationship between those? They seem randomly chosen to me.
Like, why doesn't the movement like those people? Is that what you're asking?
Why those two in particular? Why do they seem to get the majority of headlines? Like if you're wanting to preserve the purity of the race, why not be upset in America with like immigrant Mexicans? Like why isn't that the number one threat instead of Blacks and Jews?
Well, the movement viewed Mexicans and illegal immigration as a huge threat as well. Anybody else. But why the hyper focus on the Jews goes back to age-old anti-Semitism, old tropes. This was a movement that was modeled sort of after Nazi Germany. So there, the scapegoat was the Jewish people. These movements need a scapegoat. They need somebody that's as the great enemy, instead of being able to like look in the mirror and say, you know what? I could do better. I could work harder. I could have, done something else. It's easier for a lot of people to, to find a scapegoat. And that just happened to be a convenient one as far as how the mindset works and the way like the propaganda they would spew that type of thinking. Now, like I'll make a joke out of it. I'll say that it was so bad as far as like the focus on the Jewish people, that it was so bad. Like you could accidentally spill a glass of water and you'd say, it was the Jews, like and I'm being facetious now, but like that's it wasn't quite that bad, but it's close. That's why I make that example. It was close to that bad. So they would say things like, well, the Jews owned all the slave ships that brought blacks over here, and now, we have this problem with black people, and now we have this problem with this people, and when you focus on the negatives, and these groups do that, they'll bring in, and I was guilty of this too, like showing videos of things like farm murders in South Africa, or finding terrible racially motivated murders here in the United States, and showing people those clips. And that hatred, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from fear. Fear is one of the driving factors of that. It's like you'd see those horrible videos, and of course they're terrible, and you'd say, look, this is what could happen to your family. That could be your wife. That could be your mother. That could be your kids. You need to get involved and do something. So it appeals to this masculinity and this manliness of wanting to do something and wanting to protect your family and your people. And it's twisted into this false narrative that all these people are bad. And instead of just saying, okay, these were some really evil people that did these crimes and did these horrible things, it's generalized into they're all like that. And even if you start second guessing that and going, well, hey, I know this family over here that's black or Jewish or Hispanic or whatever, and they're not like that, they're good people. You try to push that down psychologically. And I'm not justifying any of this. I'm just explaining how the mindset works. And you start going, well, we're not going to sort that out. I mean, we'd actually say that to people like in the movement when they say, well, what about this family? They're really nice. And, you'd say, are we going to sort that stuff out? No, we want a white homeland, and they just need to be out of it. We're not going to sort those things out and figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad. Just lump them all into the bad category. And that's how it worked. It's really irrational when you think about it. But when you're embedded in that sort of thinking, it made sense at the time.
Yeah. So then are you allowed to keep one of those as an exception? Like, here's one of the good ones? Or do you need to get them out of your life in order to be fully accepted by the group and not questioned about your loyalty?
But typically the hard line was drawn at like race mixing, where if there was like couples getting together and there might be kids getting involved, things of that nature, that's where a real hard line was driven. But typically you just wouldn't associate with anybody outside of your race, and it becomes very cult-like. The way I explain it now, when I was involved, even girls that I was dating from outside of the movement, one after another, they're telling me when they would come to some event I was doing or something, they'd be like, this is a cult and you're like a cult leader. And I'm thinking, why am I making these terrible choices in women? That's what was going through my mind.
That's awesome.
Right.
Wow. Our brains are fascinating.
But there was nothing wrong with them. It was me, but when you're radicalized into that and you're thinking that way, you don't see it. So everybody else sees it, but you don't.
Right. Yeah. Well, and you talk about the fear being the impetus for a lot of that. So from my perspective, and I know this is all really uncomfortable territory for two white males to be talking about, but like I always thought, based on my ignorance and naivete, that like the phrase punch a Nazi was like kind of like screw the Republicans. Like, you don't actually want to have intercourse with the Republicans. It's just a phrase that means like boo Republicans. And I thought like punch a Nazi was like boo Nazis. And I was like, yeah, that makes sense. It wasn't until I interacted with some people who meant that literally. And I was like, okay, yeah, punch a Nazi, but like what do you actually do about the Nazis? Like, get rid of them. I'm like just if they have this idea in their head, this wrong idea, you're allowed to hit them. Like, yeah, they don't deserve to live. I was like, and there are apparently large mobs that are much larger than I was comfortable with. Like I didn't realize this was a real thing. And my reaction, and again, it's really uncomfortable as a white male to be thinking this, but I'm thinking, well, of course they feel oppressed if they are literally oppressed just for having the thought in their head. Like they haven't done any crimes yet. They're just really, really twisted in the way that they're approaching race and the world and biology and, maybe hateful. Like a lot of people are hateful, and we're not allowed. It's not just open season on anyone who has a bad idea in their head. So to me, it seems, I want to use the word legitimate, but I'm sure there's a better term, to feel like you're being oppressed if you're a part of that group. And again, maybe that's your own fault for, the kinds of things you've said. It causes a lot of backlash, but also there has to be a better way to reach these people than just annihilate them because they're voting for annihilation and annihilation is bad. Like, none of this makes sense in my head. What do you see is the right reaction to these, let's say, racist parties?
Well, first of all, I don't think the Republicans are racist. I don't lump that. I don't say
I
that.
picked them randomly. I could have easily said Democrats, or I don't even care about the politics game. I'm just saying that,
What do you do
the
when
group
you're
of like that group
right?
versus like, I actually am for violence against people with these thoughts in their head.
No, I know. I understood what you were saying. I just wanted to add that little bit of nuance in it. But the whole punch a
Okay.
Nazi in the face thing, and I actually did a couple short little video clips on this a couple years ago, especially when it was really trendy and all that. And I can tell you, questions come up a lot in talks and things that I've done. No one has ever left the movement by getting punched in the face. It just doesn't. Violence doesn't work. What that does, and I can tell you from all the clashes over the years that I had with the far left, with Antifa, with the communists, that sort of thing, it re-energizes just about everybody that's involved in it, and it makes you double down. It makes you more radical. It makes you fight harder for what you're fighting in. That's the way it had the effect it had on me and most people that I knew. And especially when the groups and the group I was involved was guilty of this too, is like weaponizing that footage. If you got footage of fistfights or street battles with the left, you amplified that, you put it out, and then members that didn't come or that weren't able to make that, they're like, oh my God, if I would have known this was going, I would have been there. I'll be at the next one. So violence never solves anything. It's almost, if somebody leaves over getting punched in the face, they were not committed in the first place. They could have stubbed their toe, tripped and fall and go, oh, I'm out anyways. Because I can think of some of those people, like a handful of those people that were kind of drifting in and out, and it could have been anything. I mean, great, they're gone, but that is not the way to get somebody out. It does not work. A compassionate, empathetic, and approach, we call it relational dialogue, but having this like respectful dialogue, listening, being curious and asking questions and framing things in a different way. It's not a snap of a fingers fast process, but it's all about planting seeds.
Yeah. So then to go back to the Republican thing real quick, another thing that's doesn't make sense to me. So it's, the name of the party is the American Socialist Party. Is that right? I got it wrong. The group that you used to be a part of. It's called the what?
National Socialist Movement.
National Socialist Movement. Okay. So then that is far right. Is that right?
It's considered that, but then like a lot of the people on the right, like people will conflate Republicans on the right. Republicans and National Socialists don't get along. That's the enemy. So yes, it's on the right, but there is some nuance there. And in more recent years, there's some groups that would technically be still in that white supremacy category, but then they're called like National Bolsheviks, and they're like nationalist communists, which I always thought was bizarre. When I was involved, I didn't like those people, and I wouldn't typically collaborate with them because I didn't like communists.
Okay. In my mind, socialism and communism are really closely linked, and they're far left, not on the right at all. My brain is all scrambled.
I know, right? National Socialist is what the German Hitler's movement would call it, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. So that's where National Socialist movement comes from. But yes, there's a lot of confusion on that, and a lot of the like political platitudes and platforms of the movement actually are quite left leaning. It just depends. Like some things are very, very right leaning and some things are very left. So when that would come up when I was running the movement for all those years, I would say National Socialism is neither, this was the answer I would give. I said National Socialism is neither right nor left. It takes the best of the right and the best of the left and combines it. That's the answer that I would give when I was involved.
I love that, and because that's everyone's answer every time, no matter who you ask. If they're far right, far left, wherever they are, they always consider themselves centrist. I consider myself centrist, and I assume that I'm not. Yeah, that's funny. Man, humans. So what I'm getting from this is there's probably too many different, I'm going to say, denominations of white supremacist, racist groups, alt-right, that's even a denominational term. There's too many of those for me to parse out which is which. And if I want to start a conversation with a person, I should probably ask them what labels they accept on themselves and then try to use those labels for themselves to not accidentally offend them by calling them something that is synonymous in my head but is an enemy in their head.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much nuance there. Just like you brought up alt-right, and this is something that I explained in my book that came out June 24th. The difference between like the alt-right and then what I was involved in, which would be considered the hard right. A lot of the people on the hard right and the alt-right did not get along. Like I did not get along with them, and they didn't get along with me. So and in the groups that I was involved with. So there is a lot of, that's a sort of a newcomer on the scene. They came involved. I forget. I'm terrible with dates and times, but they came onto the scene. I think maybe 2010, or maybe it was even later than that. But they're sort of a newcomer on the scene, the alt-right.
Yeah. Okay. That's fun. So then it seems like, in general, for the people that I run into, everyone who falls into this category of some kind of racist view, they are all MAGA and Trump supporters, and all Trump supporters are MAGA. So I appreciate the head shake. There's terrible people of all brands, and there's good people of all brands.
Yes.
So, but you go ahead and tell me about the group that you used to be a part of, their relationship to MAGA or Republican or whatever.
I'm glad you're asking this, because most people try to avoid these questions.
Okay, cool.
No, a lot, I've heard that, and there's nuance, but like in the movement that I was involved in, they did not like Trump. They did not like the Republicans, and especially, let's say with Donald Trump, his daughter was married to a Jewish person. He's a huge supporter of Israel, was then and is now as well. So that's not compatible with neo-Nazism. So this business about calling Republicans Nazis and fascists, it's dangerous. And we can say the same. We can say from the flip side, people on the right, when they call all Democrats communists, that's also not true or inaccurate. Just like you calling Republicans Nazis or fascists. This is ridiculous. It's dangerous talk is when it boils down to it. And we have political polarization in this country right now that is greater than, I say right now, but in the last number of years, it has been really heightened. And that divide is getting deeper and deeper because people are pushing those narratives. And I can tell you, when I was the leader of the NSM, when I was involved in that, I liked that. When the left would call everybody in the Republican Party Nazis and fascists, I just sit there and rub my hands and go, yes, keep saying that, because it's going to drive more people to us. So if when you act that way and you engage in that sort of behavior, and I'm not picking sides here, I don't play that game. I'm saying if the right does it or the left does it, and they're saying that, those extremes, everybody on the left is a communist, everybody on the right's a Nazi or a fascist. When you do that, you're adding to the polarization in this country, you're adding to radicalization, and you are pushing people in that direction. And it's called, the academic term for it is reciprocal radicalization.
I'll write that one down too. Reciprocal radicalization. I like it. That rings true. That sounds like the perfect term. Just a second. Yeah. And reciprocal radicalization seems like that is the most normal human response. It goes back to the fear thing of you're refusing to allow me to be who I know that I am, or you're applying a label to me that I know doesn't apply to me, and then treating me accordingly to that thing. So I am now being attacked. And yeah, that's always going to create more of it.
It's dehumanization. And, a lot of times people will say, neo-Nazis are dehumanizing people, but it's the same on the other side when they say, let's punch a Nazi because we need to get rid of them. We need to do this. And then you extend that to beyond actual Nazis to like anybody that's even conservative or doesn't agree with you. Violence and heading in those directions, and even that sort of thinking, it can, I'm not advocating for thought crimes or anything. I'm just saying that sort of thinking can lead to, those are the first steps towards radicalization. It doesn't mean everybody's going to radicalize when they're talking radical, but it can pave the way for that. It can be very dangerous, and it's just not good for our country. It's not good for anybody.
It's interesting to me that when we're talking about like sex and gender, there's one side that says, we need to give people the pronouns that they're asking for. We need to use the correct labels for these people that they want for themselves. And yet those are often the same people that want to put labels like racist or Nazi or whatever on other people, despite those people saying, well, that's not the label that I identify with, and vice versa. Like, oh, well, I'm not a neo-Nazi. I wrote it down, I'm a National Socialist, but I'm not going to go with that they, them stuff. That's not real. Like, can you guys not see that everyone's playing the same game of you are what I say you are so that I can put something on you that makes you my enemy. And also you have to call me what I want to be called.
Right.
It seems silly.
It's totally irrational especially when you break it down that way. It is completely irrational. But in the mindset of the person that's doing that, they feel justified and validated in that, and they expect everybody else to adhere to that. I think it really just goes back to being respectful. It's like if you know somebody and they want to be called they, them, I mean, instead of asking what might first pop into your mind, like if you have a split personality disorder or something, instead of doing that, you would say like, okay, well, this person is being respectful. They asked me to refer to them as they, them. I guess I'm going to do that. I don't feel like it's a big deal now, but it just goes back to having that respect and that open dialogue and treating people right. But you also have, if you're doing that, it has to be a two-way street. You can't go and be nice to somebody that's screaming in your face or something.
Right. Well, and it's a matter of whether or not you want to continue the conversation or whether you want to feel internally validated about your bias that you're bringing into it. And if you want to feel validated, then do the things that feel good, which is put the label on them that allows you to hate them and to make them your enemy. But if you're wanting to continue the conversation, I would say even if they are yelling at you and even if they're not trying to continue the conversation with you, your best option is to continue to try to continue the conversation with them, still be respectful of them. And that's what I really appreciate about people like you who are going into an environment where you may already know that your message is going to be accepted there, but going in relentlessly, graciously, and not bending on the message at all, not agreeing with their message, but also going in with the understanding that this is not going to be a two-way street at the beginning. You gotta build some kind of relationship before maybe you can make some progress with these people.
And you're right. And it is a difficult thing, and it's not something that it takes practice. It takes patience. It takes being curious and practice. I guess I said practice twice, but it takes a lot of practice and it takes a lot of patience. That's not an easy thing to do, and it's actually counterintuitive from the way most of us handle those conversations. But if you do it that way, you can certainly reach people.
What have you learned in trying to reach back into that community and change minds? What makes for better conversations? What makes for worse conversations?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to approach it. Typically, like, we talk about like having interventions or having conversations with people, but it's not in the traditional sense that you might think of, like like we're going into these you walk into a neo-Nazi meeting and you try to have a conversation there. That's not going to work. That doesn't work. The person has to be even having a conversation with these guys like out at one of their rallies or something. It just usually does not work. It's very rare if that's going to work in those heated scenarios. It's having one-on-one conversations, respectful, outside of that. And it's also not being offended, like if somebody calls me up and and this happens often where I'll get on a conversation with somebody that's still in the movement, that they're maybe questioning some things, but they're still there and they're going to spew out all kinds of things that are offensive, and I don't agree with them, but I listen. And I'll say, I'm listening. And some people don't have that kind of patience or don't have that whereabout, like if you go in and say, no, you're wrong. Why are you using that offensive word? You just lost that person in that conversation. They're not going to talk to you anymore. They're going to be like, oh man, this guy's he's on the left now or something. And in their minds, everything is black and white, no pun intended, but there's no middle ground. And this was a really big thing that I first noticed when I left the movement. And I said I was going to, work in peace building. I was going to speak out against racism and hate. And almost everybody that was contacting me, especially in the beginning, was asking, so you left the movement. Are you Antifa now? Are you a communist? And I start getting like, wow, oh my God, why are they? Like not one person, not two people, over and over and over again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, why do they think I'm a communist? Why? What am I saying? And it had nothing to do with anything that I was saying. It's that linear thinking. It's that thinking, because I was like that too. Anytime somebody left, okay, now you must be on the other extreme. They don't see there these gray areas. So when I explain, no, I don't have nothing to do with those people. They're extremists. I'm not involved in that. And you don't have to be either if you leave, and they're just like, whoa. Like you just released this grand epiphany that they never considered or thought was real. And they're like, seriously? You don't have to be Antifa when you leave the movement? And that kind of thinking got skewed as well, because there was some people that left that flipped to the other extreme. That's not a de-radicalized individual. That's just somebody that flipped from one extreme to another. And that's dangerous as well.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most common, at least in the religious world. I have to believe it's true in other places, other human groups, is that if you live in this space right here, this black and white world of heightened anxiety and tension, and then you realize that the thing that you are tense and anxious about is wrong, you look for something else to be anxious and have that tension about as well. So like people who leave one cult almost always join or start another cult thinking that they're going to do it the right way. Because the problem with this thing wasn't the extremism. The problem was we just had the wrong ideas. But if we do it the right way, I can get it right. And so we just go and recreate the same thing.
It can happen that way, yeah. But I mean, for a lot of people, when they leave too, like I think it's important to have a mission, So like my mission is peace building. I have that, and I've had people say, you had a mission before, you have a mission now. I don't have that, So one of the struggles is trying to find that thing. It could be learning to play the guitar. It could be a sport. It could be. Typically, we don't encourage them to go into politics, but if they really, really like politics, maybe that's okay as long as it's not extreme. Sometimes it's religion. Sometimes it's, something else. But there's something to replace that sense of purpose, that sense of mission is a good thing to find for people. But yeah, sometimes it can go the opposite way. And I've seen it a few times, not a lot, but in a couple of cases, I can think, I'm sure there's a couple more, but I can think of a couple cases right off the top of my head where somebody had left, and then they took that negative energy that they had in the movement and infused it into something else. Like one person was like, okay, well, now I hate all Democrats. And he would just rail against Democrats. Another person went into a different religious group and then hated everybody that wasn't part of that religious group, that specific religious group. And it's like, gosh, you two haven't changed. You just shifted your anger and rage into different directions. And, so that takes a lot of work with some people, but it's not as common as one might think for that to happen. But it is a shame when it does.
Yeah. Okay. I really appreciate you saying that, since it conflicts with what I was saying, and most people, most guests and hosts don't like to have any kind of disagreement. But that's interesting to me.
I might disagree.
Well, no, because I don't know, you want to be nice and stuff. But yeah, I appreciate that you expressing that's not been your experience. I wonder if it's more, if you have the thing where you're part of this, I'm sorry, National Socialist group, and then you feel like, well, this leadership isn't really taking advantage of the opportunities or whatever, and you go start your own National Socialist movement and try to do it the right way. Is there that kind of splintering that happens?
Yeah, there is. That's pretty common. Over the years, there was way back, we go back into the 1950s, Commander George Lincoln Rockwell was the founder of the American Nazi Party. After he was assassinated, there was tons of splinters. And typically when a leader is gone, or something happens, they go to prison, they get killed, or they retire or leave or whatever, then there's more of that splintering. And some groups have it all the time. Like a lot of people will look at, for example, the Klan is highly splintered. And people will assume there's just one Klan group, and there's hundreds, because some of them, and some people will leave over ideological reasons, like, well, this guy isn't doing it correctly. They have those ideas, or they want to start something else. A lot of times it's a power thing, where a lot of the handful of people that would try to split off from the movement that I was a part of, they didn't get very far because the movement was big and people weren't going to go with them. But sometimes, if a popular local leader left, they might pull away some of the people that were serving underneath them, and they would follow the individual rather than the ideology. Or somebody might be kicked out, then they'll form a faction. Some of these groups, somebody stole somebody's girlfriend, they might form another faction. Or somebody's greedy and wants to try to get more financing or something and start their own group. A lot of times it's ego, though.
Yeah. Regarding the girlfriend thing, like we were talking about before, is there a thing where if you're wanting to date a girl, you have to find out how pure her bloodline is or anything like that?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Right. That's a good question. That's something that a lot of the guys in the movement are very obsessed with, like, so they'll ask. I was a little more subtle about it when I was involved. I'm dating a lot of women that are not involved, and sometimes they were, but more often than not, they weren't. And those were questions that would come up. But some of these guys would say, hey, I'm a member of this group and I want to know if you've ever slept with somebody of another race. And they would not, even if the answer was yes, it was like, oh, there's the door,
Yeah.
So that depended on the individual a lot of times, but typically that sort of thing was frowned upon.
Did you ever know anyone who was in the situation where they were like highly involved and then like did a DNA test and found that their bloodline was wildly less pure than they had formerly?
Yes, yeah. So that was actually, yes, a number of people. A number of people. And then there's people that are involved as well that like exceptions were made or they would have for the neo-Nazis, it was 1/16. So if you had
Right.
anything higher than a 16th of anything in you, then you weren't allowed involved. But there was people that would join and be like, well, I'm a quarter this or that. And then there was a line that a lot of the groups adopted, like if you look white and acted white, you're white, But if you come in and start saying, well, guess what? I'm half this or a quarter this, then you might have some problems. And depending on the group, you could get attacked. You could have, there's a lot of bad things could go with that. It wasn't conducive to it.
Yeah. So then if there's any way for you to do this, putting yourself back in Jeff's brain when he was most extreme, if he had done a DNA test and found that he was, some crazy amount non-white, what would Jeff's reaction have been at the time?
I was asked that. I was asked that a number of times when I was in the movement, and especially when I was first involved, and when I was the most radical, I would say, after I'd gotten radicalized in the early years. I think that would have been. I hesitate to say because it's always like, well, I knew my bloodline, I knew the family tree, so that was never a concern for me. But like, if something like that was to come up, I've heard people say things. I never spent a lot of time thinking about it, but it was always like, well, then I guess I would be the enemy, So it was
Right.
It was like an overwhelmingly bad mindset, And I heard people say like they would snap and they would go do something terrible, I really wasn't one of those kind of people, but
Yeah.
Can you tell me about some of the things that first started to, looking back now, you realize that those were things that started to change the way that you were thinking, and how long before you actually left did that begin?
Yeah, so that's it, for me. It took time, So there was it's very rare for somebody to have a situation where like one experience or one act of kindness changes them. I have a few of those stories, but more often than not, it's a process. And for me, it was definitely a process. I wish it was a snap of a finger's decision. But I would say if I'm looking at a timeline, there was changes that were beginning around 2015, 2016, definitely 2016.
And you left in
19.
Yeah, okay.
Early 2019. Yeah, March of 2019. One of the major seeds that was planted was meeting Daryl Davis, who was an African-American musician, and seeing the humanity in him. And soon after meeting him, I'd met a Muslim filmmaker by the name of Dia Khan, also seeing the humanity in her. Those were major changes. Living here in Detroit, where I'm at now, white people are the minority here. So I'm having interactions with people of all different races and whether I wanted to or not. And I'm seeing the humanity in everybody, in all these different people. And it's like, well, this isn't a race thing. This is a people thing. There's bad people in all racial groups, including white people. And you can't label like that. You can't put people in those boxes. So then I start having these feelings and these questions, and then it gets to this point where it's like, this is your bed. This is your bed. Now you have to lie in it. This is the life you made. This is who you are. I was very high profile. My business was wrapped up in this. Everybody I knew was wrapped up in it. I could count the people on one hand that in my life basically that weren't involved. So
Right.
That was a lot to process, and I'm trying to make changes in the group. Whenever I'm talking to the press, I'm demanding that they call it a white civil rights group. And I know that sounds ridiculous and funny, but that's how I
Why?
was processing it at the time.
Why does that sound funny?
Because it's a Nazi group, but, I was trying to change the group, and the way I explained it is sort of like putting lipstick on a pig. That's how I explained it at my school talks. I tell the kids, I said I was putting lipstick on a pig. I was trying to dress up something, make the Nazi party look pretty and be something that it's not. In my mind, that made sense. And then eventually, after a few years of trying that, I came to just the conclusion, like, there's no fixing this. You can't fix this. This is broken beyond repair. This is not something good to be involved in. And not only do I need to leave it, but I need to try to repair some of the damage I've done by being involved in that world so long. So that what spurs me to do the work that I'm doing now.
Yeah, I want to go back and hear some of those earlier stories, but from where you are in the story right now, I would imagine that you've got a lot of memories and demons that would not go away instantly in 19 when you decide that you're different now. Have you found that to be the case? Do you have a hard time dealing with recollections of things you said or did, and how do you deal with that?
The process when you're working on somebody to change their life, you want them to disengage and then de-radicalize. My journey was backwards. I was de-radicalizing while I was still in, because I was the leader of this group. And if anybody would have said that to me during those last few years I was involved, I said, you're a liar. You don't know what you're talking about. Those have been fighting words. It's the truth, though. I really was de-radicalizing while I was still in. So I was struggling with that for a while. But when I finally made the decision to break free from it, I'd never felt a pull to go back. And some people do. Some people have that pull, or feel that pull, or struggle with certain things, letting go of certain things. I thrived in a high stress environment for a very long time. So I think I process things probably faster. I'm not saying, everybody's different. Some people, it takes many, many years. Some people, it's very, very fast. There's no set timeline. But for me, I process a lot of things quickly, but I'm still always learning. I'm always learning. And anybody that tells you they're not learning, that's when the learning stops, when they, and you don't expand your horizons at that point. But it was a struggle. I do speak about it in my book, American Nazi from Hate to Humanity, about some of the struggles. And I was hesitant to even share those struggles. Like, I finished the book. I thought I was finished with it, and I had nothing about the struggles getting out. And I thought, what, that's not transparency. That's not being open with people, and they do need to understand that it is a struggle, but it was the best decision I ever made in my life, despite all the struggles.
Yeah. Okay, so then let me ask from a different perspective. So for my own life, I've got things in my past. I've got apologies that I owe to people that I'll probably never be able to be in contact with again, and caused harms that I'll never be able to undo. And moving forward, some of those things come back to tell me who I am when that's not who I am anymore. And that's a personal struggle for me to deal with that stuff. Have you had any of that kind of thing? Or do you feel like you're just like in a new direction and the past is the past? Or how does that resonate with you?
You have to I feel like, everybody's different, but I feel like making amends was incredibly important for me. And my work with, once I made the announcement that I was speaking out, I was contacted by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which is a international Jewish human rights organization. They fight for the rights of all people, but it was founded by Simon Wiesenthal, who was Jewish. And they reached out, and through them, I had met all kinds of Jewish people, which were the group I dehumanized the most. And they had showed me compassion, love, empathy. The first time I spoke at a synagogue, I got more hugs there than probably anywhere I can ever think of that prior to that. So now, and they have a word in the Jewish faith called teshuvah, which means repentance, and I feel like that's kind of, that has a lot to do with the work that I do. Nobody's making me do that, but I feel like in my heart that repentance is important. But I try not to live in the past, because I do know other folks that have done that, where they kind of stay stuck there. And you can't heal if you stay stuck there. Like, don't forget that stuff. Remember those mistakes and learn from them. But if you stay stuck in there, it will affect your health. It will affect your mental health. And you can't help nobody. If you can't help yourself, you can't help others. So that was a bit of a struggle for me, especially the first couple years. But through a lot of the people that were kind of there for me and helping me through that, like the question of forgiveness was a big one. And a friend of mine, had someone asked me in one of the talks if I forgave myself, and I said, I don't know. And he come up to me afterwards, is shaking me. He says, don't you ever say that. You can't help others if you don't forgive yourself, and you can't help yourself. Don't think like that. don't feel like that. And that was helpful to me because I was all of us that have left that behind, and especially those of us that speak out, we carry a lot of guilt and shame and regret and stuff like that. But you can't live in that shame and regret.
So then, either in your own experience or in the experience of people that you watch go through this process of de-radicalization, are there particular beliefs out of the worldview, the belief set, that are particularly sticky or tend to be the last things to go as they're coming out?
Yeah, for some folks, they have that. For me, the last thing, like by the time I left the movement, I felt like the racism was gone before I left. That was out the door, but I was still had some questions about Jews. That was for a lot of people, especially in the neo-Nazi scene, that's the last thing to let go of, is some of those things. And I was a Holocaust denier too. So it's like I felt like I'd mostly gotten over the so-called Jewish question, but I still had doubts about some things in the Holocaust right when I first left, like those first few months. But before I started speaking out, I made sure that was addressed, that I worked through that, because you can't speak out. If you're still working on yourself that much where you're still struggling with those things, you shouldn't be speaking out. So I had to work through that stuff before I spoke out. But it's a common thing that I'm seeing with a lot of people that have reached out for help too, that they'll get stuck on certain things. And because that Holocaust denial and a lot of that stuff comes in pretty hard, especially in the neo-Nazi movement. So for me, that was the last thing to let go of. For other people, it's different things. And I could go into some, generalize some scenarios.
So for me, like, Holocaust denial has to be a spectrum of like anywhere from like that didn't happen at all to like, well, it did happen, but they deserved it, or it happened, but it wasn't as big a deal. Or like, I would imagine there's a lot of different brands of Holocaust denial. So what are some of the ideas? Can you break apart for me, like, what ideas would be more sticky and which ones would be easier to let go of? I have no idea what I'm talking about.
For some people, they believed it. They believed that and they thought it was good. So that was some, but I think most of the people, in my experience, at least most of the people that I interacted with, believe that it happened on some level, but not to the numbers degree that it was publicly acknowledged. That there was, and I don't want to get into it because I don't want to get into the exact details of it, because then it could send people down that path. I don't want to do that. The way I handle it with people that are still struggling with it, I ask them, I said, okay, so you're hung up on the numbers, because I was too. I was like, okay, a lot of people died, but a lot of Germans died, a lot of Americans died, a lot of just people in general died. War is a terrible thing. So I said, does it matter if it was 1,000, if it was 6 million, if it was 12 million? That's a lot of people, no matter how you slice it. Does that make it okay? No, it's not okay. But why are they lying about it? Then that's their second answer, and say, let's just break this down. It's not okay. Right. And then, then they kind of get it into perspective, and there's a lot more that goes into it than that. But that's sort of some of the first steps that I utilize to address that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I feel like if people are going to be de-radicalized, they have to be allowed to ask those questions. Because if you don't voice that, that's not going to go away.
Exactly.
Like, if you have that question of like, okay, but why would they inflate the numbers? Like, what's behind that? And you don't express that and let it out and let someone respond to it and put it in the soup of humanity and let someone else show you why that line of thinking is either wrong or not helpful, like, that's gonna sit in there and it's gonna come out somehow. It might not even come out against Jewish people, but it's not going to do good things in you. So I feel like if I could have a message to the world, it would be like, we need to welcome these questions of ignorance so that there can be some kind of response to it, and you don't become isolated or sneak off into your corner and find other people who like whisper the same thing, like, yeah, I know, right? That's what I was thinking too. Like, that's how you get those things, because you didn't allow those ignorances to come out.
That's right. And asking those questions and being able to process that, and not to have somebody, and for someone to be open about it and be able to share that. And I just thought of something real quick that really helped me as well. And this is another thing that I bring up, because in the movement, a lot of people think like Jews are, and I say the movement, the neo-Nazi movement, to be clear, they believe like Jews are inherently evil and they're doing all these evil things. Well, early on when I got out and I was struggling with this, or I was pretty much over it by this point, but I was still had some questions, and this Jewish girl that I knew was asking me questions. I wasn't even asking her questions, and she's like, "Well, why did the movement think this? Why that?" And she goes, "Let me put it to you in a perspective like this. She goes, I understand your beliefs, the beliefs you had, and all that, but." She goes, her family were Holocaust survivors. And she had told me about how on the one side of the family, some family members just hammered that into their heads as kids growing up. And she goes, that's like all we heard about. We didn't want to go to our grandparents because it was all about the Holocaust and all this trauma. It's like we grew up hearing this trauma and it was passed on to us. It's called generational trauma, actually. That generational trauma was passed down to us. And she goes, Jeff, do you really think like that Jewish people would traumatize their own children with that sort of thing if it was a lie? And I was just blown away by that. I'm out of the movement at this point, but I was just blown away by that and said, oh my gosh, I said, no one ever approached me in that manner when I was in the movement. That would have maybe caused me to think, because that really set wheels in motion. And that's something that I've utilized with other people that have struggled with that. And it made them think too, because it was sort of like, okay, even if you think, they're bad and that all Jews grow up to be evil and bad, are they really going to hurt their own kids and punish them with this stuff that's made up? Or would they just spread that lie on their own? It doesn't make sense. You see what I'm saying? So like, of course it's real. So that's one of those things that it's another perspective and it's another way to get people thinking. I kind of like looking back, I wish somebody would have approached me with that. Would I have been able to listen? Would I have been able to take that in? I guess it depends on the timeline or when that approach was done. But I sure wish. You can't change the past. We don't have time machines to go back and fix these things, but that's a tool and an approach that I bring up when I have people that are struggling with it.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to which things are the things that like stick with a person, depending on like how ready they are for that idea. That it can be something really silly, but like they were just ready for that thing to be the catalyst for change in that moment.
Yep.
How can you tell if someone is going to be able to be de-radicalized or if they're going to stay in it forever?
I don't think there's an answer to that, because I would have told you I would have stayed in it forever, because that was the plan. But it didn't work out that way. Having those interpersonal connections and meeting people that I viewed as not them personally as the enemy, but of those enemy groups, and having positive interactions with them. And there was other things that stacked up too. I mean, there's so much that took place, and all those things sort of like whittled away at that belief, that deeply held belief system. So, it's really difficult. And there's one individual that had reached out to me after I'd gotten out, and he was in the movement since the 1970s.
Wow.
And got out. So, I mean, that was much longer than I was involved. And that's somebody that if somebody would have, when he called me up and he's trying to convince me, I said, of all the people, I would have never expected this guy to get out. And he's working to convince me on the phone. And I said, brother, I know you. If you tell me you're out, I believe you. But I just want to know why and how did the process go? Because I want to learn. And so he shared his story and all that. But so we never really know. You never know. Even though it's harder, the longer you're in, the harder it is, I think, a lot of times to break free from it. And especially like my challenges getting out, and I think I explained this in the book too, were a lot different because I was the leader and because my business and all these other things were wrapped up in it, and it had been so long. So there was extra complications that I had that somebody else might not. But I also had other, positive things. Like my father never slammed the door on me, and I had some family and stuff still. So, and some people don't. Everybody has different challenges. Don't want to minimize that or make it that mine were necessarily greater, even though they were more complex than a lot of other people would have. But the lesson to be learned is just don't get involved in radical stuff in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and hopefully leave the door open to the idea that you might currently be radicalized. Like the people who are radicalized don't think that they are. And so be open to changing your mind. And I know you had your whole life wrapped up in it, your business, but even if you take out that stuff, the other members, to different degrees, have their identity in this. They've got their reputation in this. They've got their community in this. Like, it's not like it's a free thing to leave. And so it's costly for everybody.
Yes.
And like you're saying, you can't tell which one is like a potential deconvert, you know? And so when I look at my own life, I say the same thing. Like, there was no way that I was going to change at any point, but I'm glad that people didn't give up on me. I'm glad that I wasn't written off. And so because I know who I was, I can't afford to ever write somebody else off as forever gone, but just to be the kind of person that is perhaps making a way for someone to see things from a different perspective and go out in the world that way. And it seems like that's what you're doing. I really appreciate you joining me today. We've got so much more that we could talk about, but we're out of time. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. But thanks so much for you and what you're doing and your heart. I love you.
Thank you so much, brother. Great being on the program, and thanks for having me, and keep up the good work out there.
As you can hopefully tell, I spent considerable effort putting this all together so you could have it for free. So now it's your turn. If you would click a couple buttons and give me something for free, we can keep this good thing going. And for all of you like-minded superfans, follow the link in the description for more free ways to show your support and keep this love train rolling. Be well, everyone. I'm rooting for you.